a small group, and let's meet one another. Who are you? What do you do? Breathe. And what are you celebrating? What are you celebrating? I'm celebrating being here. You know, I don't know if there's a better job in the world, because not only do I get to travel the world and do what I love to do in the presence of people that I really admire, educators, but it doesn't seem like it to some people, but I'm home a lot, and I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I live in a beautiful place, and I love where I live, and I get to experience a whole range of things that aren't available to many people. Wilderness, culture, it's all there. So I'm celebrating being here among you, doing what I love to do. And I'm Tim Burns, I think you probably knew that. So your name, what you do, please, and what are you celebrating? And I'm going to volunteer you to begin.
I knew that.
Yes, I know you knew that. And we'll just go right across. Can you? Right. So let's get started. How many of you sat in on the presentation with the students yesterday? Yeah, most of you, but not all of you. Well, for those of you who were here, you can demonstrate what I opened up with the kids, because by now I'm sure you would have really learned it. And for those of you who didn't, you'll get a chance to do it as well. The whole premise of this activity is the knowledge that keeps coming out about how important movement is to getting energy moving properly in the brain. And I know by now, all of us have had some exposure to neuroscience and its applications to learning, so I'll be touching on things and building on that hopefully throughout the day. So it's very important to keep in mind, I think, that the brain in general, oversimplifying, needs to successfully integrate all of the neural fields sufficiently, and especially in the early years, that information and energy can flow properly from side to side. That's the communication dimension, and it facilitates problem solving and creativity, as well as verbal communication. And movement back and forth, which is sometimes referred to as the concentration dimension, because the ability to focus, attend, and concentrate is a function of the frontal lobes' ability to take over those operations. And that lies at the root of the inability of some children to properly attend. We give it all kinds of labels, attention deficit disorders, and so forth. But it's a disorder of the frontal lobes for a variety of reasons, known and unknown. So side to side, back to front, and then finally, we need to have the ability to self-regulate, which is a term I want to go into a bit more, because it's becoming more of a problem for children, to be able to self-regulate their brain and mind and mood states. And if a human being can't regulate their moods in particular, in the social domain, they're going to struggle with problems interpersonally for life. And we're seeing a rise in those kinds of problems. And there are many factors at work, but I think increasingly it's the screen technologies who are just being introduced at way too young an age, as a result of which children are growing up reasonably deficient in a number of areas. And teachers are the first to recognize this. In any case, we also need to be able to move energy up and down. So we need to be able to energize the high brain, and we need to be able to calm down the midbrain, the limbic region, the seat of very important but very primitive emotional states. And there are ways of accomplishing all those. And one of the ways to accomplish that is through movement. And another way is through mindfulness training, which is what I'll end the day on. Very important wave that has arisen worldwide and is making its way into the schools. And I think it's one of the best things to happen for educators who have very stressful lives, some of it good stress, some of it not so good, and for children, to give them those very, very good thrival skills early in life. So it's very exciting stuff. So stand up. All right. So this is where I began with children. I'll begin it with you, right? So with your left arm, I'll use my right. You can just mirror me here. Eric, you did this a bunch of times, so you come up and demonstrate. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. So I asked the children, and a surprising number of them actually know the answer to this, which is very encouraging. So I'm using my right arm. Which side of my brain is controlling that? The opposite, right? And children know that too. Let's switch sides. It's one of the great mysteries of neurological science. A lot of neuroscience. You can stop for just a moment. A lot of neuroscience is empowered and made more potent by a good understanding of evolutionary biology. And I'll share a little bit of that with you today as we go along, and why it's so important to have a basic understanding of that, I think. But nobody really knows why that is. Why would the left side of the brain control the right side of the body? It seems like counterintuitive somehow. And what I love about it is nobody really knows. It's all speculation. And I love that aspect of our existence. That some things we just have to keep wondering about. Why is that? All right, we're going to do 8. 1, 2, 3. But I'm encouraged by the fact that even little children will know that, and hopefully they'll ponder that. All right, so now we have an 8-count movement. Took maybe 20 seconds more to get that in the body. And then when we switch sides, it occurs very quickly. We don't really have to think about it, because the brain can transfer this information. Education is premised philosophically on the idea that what we teach will be applied and generalized in all other areas of life. So this is sort of a metaphor for that. All right, so you got 4 and 8. Now we're going to do 4 and 8 simultaneously. We'll do 8 on this side, we'll do 4 on this side, right? No problem. So here we go. How are we doing with that?
A little harder.
It's a little harder, isn't it? But I am getting that look that I love to see. It looks like this. Let's switch sides. You don't understand. And I'm either seeing a stare that looks sort of like this, right? Or like this. And that's good news, because the eyes actually go to the area of the brain from which we draw sources of information. This was all sort of mapped out about 15 years ago in neurolinguistic programming. It was a brilliant finding. And it's actually been applied in education, because you can ask kids certain questions and watch where their eyes go to access the information. Like for most people, if it's a visual thing, they'll look up to the right or stare straight ahead. If you're asking them for a visual thing, like, can you imagine a house flying off the ground with wings with big purple polka dots on it? You'll see the kids go like that. And they do a quick assessment. And if they're looking down here in the auditory region or something like that, then you have sort of a diagnostic cue, and you can actually train kids to go to a different area with their eyeballs, because the eyeballs are an extension of the brain. Anyway, when I see this look, right, what I know is that your frontal lobes are engaged. And that's what we want. That's where executive functions are taking place, out of the frontal lobes predominantly. So have a seat. Now you're warmed up.
Yeah, I have a question just about how
I gotta share with you my favorite quote first.
Okay.
Right? Having been a teacher for a long time, sitting through lots of in-services as you are doing today, on a Saturday no less, I have to share with you my favorite quote about in-service training. We've all been through those, right? Yes, Catherine.
Yesterday, I was able to see the kids doing this with you.
Yeah.
And I was in that corner back there, and your back was to me. And I didn't know that they were counting when they were doing it.
Okay.
But I was just mirroring what you were doing. And that for me seemed, I could totally do it. I had some other category in my head of how you were switching your arms and what you were doing.
Yeah.
And so then when I was thinking about it with the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 8, it was much harder to do than just simply mirroring it.
Ah.
So is that I mean, like, do you still get what you need if you're mirroring it, or do you also need to be thinking numbers or, other components?
What you're raising is a really, really profound point. Because mammals learn through a sequence that was spelled out by Jerome Bruner at the Center for Cognitive Studies at Harvard back in the 70s. And his team came up with a brilliant synopsis of how mammals learn. And that stuff really interests me. What he said was that all mammalian learning begins with the presence of a model. That mammals can't learn in the absence of a model. So when the model appears, and the model can be in any domain, it can be a physical demonstration of something, it can be emotional, it can be spiritual. We can think of a religious icon, for example, who becomes a model for living a moral and ethical life. It can even be something that doesn't exist. It can be a model like Santa Claus, powerful model. So it can be imagined as well. So what you're talking about there is the modeling effect. It was much easier to do it when you could actually see the model doing it. A part of modeling is mirroring, right? And we serve as both a model and a mirror for children. And that's the great opportunity for education to be a healing experience for kids. Because none of us get through life whole. We are all wounded. It is the nature of human existence to experience wounds. Many of the wounds, if not most of the wounds, are unintentional. It happens through misunderstandings or benign neglect or what have you. But the reality of the human existence is we get wounded in the process of living. So children come to us and they have their wounds. We don't talk about it much in education, and as a classroom teacher, it doesn't have to be foremost among my concerns. But by our presence, by our modeling, we add something to the lives of children, which I'll describe when I talk about the intelligence of the heart. We open up a neural field inside children through which they can begin to live the model effect. And a lot of that is what we mirror back to kids. And that's one of the great mammalian strategies that has evolved that mammals have, which others don't. And that is we learn also by feedback. And in the absence of feedback, the brain cannot change, which is one of the great predicaments of introducing screen technologies to young children, because they're very, very short on feedback. Yeah, it's getting better at providing feedback because we now have interactive stuff. But if we think that this is going to take the place for language learning, we're gravely mistaken, because language requires a rich interactive matrix of feedback. Anyway, that's probably more of a response than you need.
Totally appreciate it. Thank you.
So let's move on.
Yeah, I got the important parts.
What's that?
He asked if I got it all, so I got the important parts.
All right. So I want to talk about the three brains. I want to spend a little while just providing as a large context for what we do as parents, what we do as educators, what we do as concerned, informed citizens in a world that's really changing in dramatic ways. And I think the knowledge that's coming out about the three brains is very important. I've been very interested in this for many years. And it seems that people are much more receptive to this as the science gets better. But we have these three brains. The first brain, which I refer to as the body brain, is located in the well, in the Orient, this comes from my years of doing martial arts. This area of the body here is called the heart. It's just below the belly button. There's gray matter there. And that's known in the Western world as the enteric nervous system.
Maybe get enteric?
Enteric, E-N-T-E-R-I-C. Yeah. The enteric nervous system is part of the autonomic nervous system, which I'll talk to you later this afternoon when I'll switch from the central nervous system, the brain, to the autonomic nervous system. So if you haven't had that in a while, I'll try to present it real straightforward and simply, because it ties into stress and mindfulness and the nervous system. In Japanese martial arts, we often talk about the tanden, this area right here. I don't know how many times I got yelled at as a youngster about relaxing my tanden. In China, it's the dantian. I had no clue what they were talking about. But that idea that we have to center ourselves with our breath and relax into this area is quite a profound notion. And I'll come back to that this afternoon. Now, some years ago, this book came out, and this particular man with a very erudite series of pedigrees after his name was actually derided by his colleagues for using this title. He's a gastroenterologist, so he deals with gut issues, right? And we're all learning a lot about the biome, the microbiome, and how that influences mood, and how moods influence cognition, and wow, right back to diet, you know? We have to give up some of our bad habits. I refuse. Anyway, Gershon wrote this book called The Second Brain, and a lot of his colleagues didn't like that idea. But it's really kind of undeniable when you look at what he was actually describing, things like this. The enteric nervous system uses more than 30 neurotransmitters, just like the brain, and in fact, 95% of the body's serotonin is found in the bowels. Now, most of us, if not all of us, have heard about serotonin and its incredibly important role in, it's called the master regulator. It's a master hormone sometimes. It regulates mood and appetite. That's a big job. When it's low, we experience depression, which is a worldwide phenomenon. The World Health Organization says that by the year 2020, over 50% of the world's population is going to be clinically depressed. That's a bit gloomy, isn't it? That's a big number. That's a big number. But we know that it's at epidemic levels, and there's a lot of reasons for it. First and foremost is the stress. Because when we're stressed, the level of serotonin starts to go down, and vice versa. When the level of serotonin goes down, we feel depressed. We actually have a meaningful proportion of kids arriving at school with fairly low levels of serotonin. And there are some things that are inherent in what we do that raise those serotonin levels in schools. Touch, humor, laughter, movement, and everything that we do during the day that allows children to go into their natural brainwave default setting. Now that's a mouthful, but I am going to talk about brainwaves at different stages of a child's life into adulthood, and how each stage, following Piaget's sequela, is hallmarked by a particular brainwave setting. And to the degree to which we allow the children to go into that brainwave setting, it allows them to reset their whole nervous system for learning, for health, and so forth. The fact that this is found in the bowels, mainly, has a lot to do with mindfulness training. Because mindfulness training, apart from learning how to breathe properly, doesn't really work quite as well. It's fine to pay attention to things and be more mindful, because it brings us into the present. Where else do we really want to be? But if we want to use the mindfulness aspect of it to create greater health, which 30 years of studies of mindfulness training scientifically, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles published on it, demonstrate the efficacy of mindfulness to facilitate recovery health-wise and staying healthy. I'll share some of that this afternoon with you. But when we actually slow down our brain waves and breathe properly, we secrete more serotonin. % of the fibers of the primary visceral nerve, the vagus, and I want you to keep that one in mind because I'm going to touch on that later, carry information from the gut to the brain and not the other way around. The vagus is the major nerve trunk of the body. It originates in the low brain, goes down, one branch goes to the heart, the other goes to all the organs of the viscera. It comes back and it goes forward close to the frontal lobes of the brain. And we have children who, because of the stress or neglect or abuse happening in their lives, whose so-called upper vagal system is not working properly. And in those children, we see things like problems with impulse control, delayed gratification, consequential thinking, empathy, all the things that can worry us about children has to do with the upper part of the vagal system. And there are ways in school that we ameliorate that and heal it without even knowing it. And I want to highlight what those things are today. Because when we know what we're doing, we can do more of it consciously, knowing that we're having these effects on children, which is really very cool. The second brain contains some 100 million neurons, more than in either, that doesn't make sense. More than in either the spinal cord or the peripheral nervous system. I may have copied that wrong. Yeah, so there's gray matter here. There's also gray matter in the heart. I'll probably have time to show you some beautiful images of the ganglia of the heart. The brain matter, which is actually in the heart. That's not the most interesting thing about the research. So by way of introduction, in the same way that for the past 75 years, science has gotten better and better and better with its information gathering tools. In this case, what we're looking at is a very, very sophisticated EEG array. It's picking up subtle and not so subtle brain waves, alpha, beta, theta, delta, gamma, all these epsilon, all these brain waves that we experience, which reflect cognitive states. Very alert, very awake, very sleepy, tranced out, relaxed. All these states are reflected in these technologies, and they're getting far out. Science has gotten very, very interesting in how you can reshape the way the brain experiences the world. There's a tremendous amount of interest in this. Well, in the same way that you can get measures, accurate measures of these different states of consciousness that exist and which we go through on an ultradian rhythm, and I'll come back to that later because it's an unusual term. Ultradian rhythms operate in 90 to 120 minute cycles, although they are flexible. So we go through these periods where we're very alert and awake, and then we go into these states of relaxed drowsiness and trance, sometimes wanting to take a nap, which is not a bad idea. And then we go through these states up and down all day. Children's default settings, depending on their age, are in one of these settings. It isn't until the onset of the adult years that our predominant brainwave is beta. And therein lies the problem with stress, is we spend too much of our day in a beta state, where we're trying to stay focused and concentrated and alert. And we're not in a situation where we can enjoy all the benefits of allowing our brainwaves to slow down, which is an inescapable aspect of our evolutionary heritage. So, in the same way that science has been measuring and plumbing the depths of these brainwaves, we also are now aware that the heart has its own electromagnetic array. But it's way more powerful than the brain. The electromagnetic array of the heart is 50 times more powerful electrically than the brain. It's 5,000 times more powerful magnetically. This is the magnetic array of the heart, and it has the true signature of magnetic energy. It's a toroid field. It's a donut-like shape. And every organ of the body, every cell, the planet Earth, the sun, black holes, the spiral galaxies, all these entities have a toroid field. And it's a nested layer. Our electromagnetic field interacts with the electromagnetic field of the Earth. Yeah.
Can you spell that toron field?
Well, it's a toroid. T-O-R-I-D.
Okay.
Toroid, toroidal.
Oh, right. Okay.
Torus. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good. And this field has very, very unusual properties, which would be well known to physics, in that they are self-sustaining and they're holographic. This is the most amazing thing that's coming out of physics. These are holographic fields. You can take a little bit of the field and subject it to analysis, and you get a picture of everything in the whole field. It's like a holographic image. A holographic image uses a particular kind of very complex, which I don't understand, technologies to take a picture of an object, and then when coherent light, lasers, are shot through the image, a three-dimensional image appears. We've all seen them by now. Have you not seen a holographic? Yeah, you can walk around them, you know. Put your hand right through it. I first saw one in New Zealand. It's so much fun. The interesting thing is if you take the holographic plate and break it in half and shine coherent light through it, you get two complete images, not two half images. You break it in half again, shine coherent light through it, and you get four three-dimensional images. The clarity of it starts to break down. So physicists are going, wow, this is such an amazing thing. Well, it turns out then you get these very, very smart Nobel Prize winning brain-mind people like Carl Pribram, and they're saying that the universe is holographic, you know, and so forth. Yes?
Sorry, is coherent light the same thing as polarized light?
I don't think so.
Can you explain?
Coherent light would be like what happens in a laser.
Oh, okay.
So this is all incoherent light in here. It's going in all directions, right?
Okay.
But if you take it and create a laser light, you create a coherent beam of it, right? So that's what they use. They use coherent light to go through it. So anyway, I better stop there because this gets so interesting. You're here for the boring stuff. I'll remember that. But so here's a point, and the point is that now scientists can measure this several feet away from the body. Currently, it's about 12 to 15 feet away. So they're doing these experiments where they'll set up one person, well, both people, with an EKG. They'll look at heart rate variability, which is medically, it's the most accurate measure of the health of the organ systems of the body. It's very, very interesting stuff. That is, what's the beat-to-beat interval? And how variable is it? The more variable it is, the healthier the body. And anyway, they'll get all these, they'll put EKGs and EEGs and pulse rate and respiration monitors and all this. And what they're interested in is what's happening with the ability of another person to read what's in the heart field of the other. And they have person A go into a state of frustration and then into a state of appreciation, and it's all being registered in the other person's brain field, which suggests that we really are having this influence on each other all the time. And what it raises is the important issue. It raises this really important issue of, as educators, why I think being an educator is a spiritual calling, you know, because we are called on to do something about our spirit life, right? To live a life where we feel appreciation and gratitude and love and kindness and all those things. And it also gives us a way to understand the importance of when we have bad days, and we're human and we don't have to do it perfectly, we do have bad days. And when we show up at the school, we can say, okay, I'm just going to set that aside, and I'm going to focus on what I'm grateful for. And immediately the heart array starts to change, because as the brain waves are measuring states of awareness, the heart field is measuring emotional states. And we know that the mood or the emotion that we're in has a profound effect on our thinking capacities. So there you have it. The heart generates the strongest electromagnetic field produced by the body, and this field becomes more coherent as the individual shifts into a loving or caring state. In physics and the new biology, coherence is a very important term, because it has to do with how complex systems operate and grow and change. The more open a system is, and the more that it can adjust to influences and readjust itself, the healthier the system is. The way that the heart becomes more coherent is by inviting in positive emotions. Always. Inviting that in. Some days are better than others, admittedly, right? But when we invite appreciation and gratitude and caring, these are things we're actually measuring at the Heart Math Institute in California. And visit this website sometime, www.heartmath.org. I go there about once a year and I download all their new research. It's free. And then occasionally I'll purchase. They also sell things. They also have training groups, business and so forth. This is a good publication. It's got about 25 articles that they presented at conferences on neurocardiology. In fetal development, the heart forms and starts beating before the brain begins to develop. These are things that are just generally accepted now. A mother's brain waves can synchronize to her baby's heartbeat even when they are a few feet apart. So that field that you saw, the double toroid field, this one that extends about 3 feet, is sometimes called the subtle field. And that's the field in which traditionally human beings carried their young. In fact, in some cultures still today, the babies are born. Not always on the mother either. It's oftentimes a daughter, an older daughter. And it was the innate knowledge or wisdom that indigenous people had about the importance of the baby's well-being being attached to a mother's loving, caring state. Of course, the problem we have in contemporary society is babies aren't carried that way any longer, and oftentimes mothers are very distressed. There's a lot of stress, a lot more happening in our lives. And some people have worried about that in terms of what's happening to the baby's nervous system when they're outside that field for long periods of time, perhaps. And I should say mother in person, because one of the good things that's happening is that fathers are actually taking more of an active role in parenting and being mothering, which is good. This is good. Anyway.
Can I ask a quick question on that?
Yeah.
I mean, with regard to mothering, like, would a father's brainwave also synchronize?
Yes.
Or that
Yes.
older sister? So
It's
there's
the
a
mothering,
synchronization,
it's the active mothering.
Okay,
It's the nurturing,
okay, thank you.
which without nurturing, the mammalian brain cannot develop properly.
Can I ask you a question too?
Well, yes, you can, please ask questions.
Because you said something about and the older daughter as well. So you're saying that synchronization can last longer than infancy, like between a mother and a child?
What I was suggesting is it's not always the mother who's doing the job of carrying the baby. It's oftentimes the daughter.
Oh,
The sister of the baby.
The sister of the baby.
Oh,
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the synchronization between baby and mother figure or whatever.
Yeah, the mother figure. Yeah. And
How
the
long
whole.
did that last go about? I mean, like, when a child is 10, is that gone, that synchronization?
Oh, not necessarily. We synchronize to other people's heart rates all the time.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's my question.
But it's critical with a baby because it's that being in that field of a loving person which actually conditions the immune system. It's been known for a long time that the immune system is pretty much set for life by age 2. By age 2. And there are people who are studying the link between the health and viability of the immune system and heart rates. Yeah. So there's a lot of interest in this, since the implications of this heart field are being unfolded by some very interesting science. Negative emotional states create nervous system chaos, but positive emotions do the opposite. And hopefully I'll have more time to get back into this today. So there we have it. So we get all these benefits. So brain 1, the most primitive brain, evolutionarily, is a sensing brain. This area of the body is an acutely sensitive instrument for picking up what's happening in our environment. When we don't feel safe, we feel it here. We get a tight gut, we get loose bowels. When we're anxious, afraid, when we're excited, we get butterflies. Which is one of the reasons why it's so important to teach children how to breathe diaphragmatically, to breathe down into this area. And most of us, because we live such stressful lifestyles, we breathe shallowly most of the day up here. We forget that we have to slow down and breathe into here. But with training, which doesn't take very long, many times throughout the day we can just sink down in here, releasing more serotonin, resetting ourselves, creating a better immune system response so we get healthier and so forth. So we have a sensing brain, and then we have an emotional brain right here. And the emotional brain is the most powerful of all. It's even more powerful than the cephalic brain, we could say. Okay. It's time for you to have a little conversation. So I'm going to stop talking and let you just turn to a neighbor or everybody at your table and tell them what's on your mind and heart right now. So go ahead, let me give you a few minutes to do this. This goes on and on. So here's a little technique, mindful technique, and there's a lot of these we can do. Children, once they get with the idea of how pleasurable it is to close their eyes and relax different times throughout the day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ring a chime here, and when you can no longer hear it, raise your hand. Now, if you close your eyes during this, your brain will start to produce a lot of synchronous alpha. Because in order to pay attention when somebody such as me is talking at you and showing you hopefully some useful slides, your brain is being really jammed with sensation, right? And you're trying to keep up with that. At the same time, you're wanting to process it, which we just did, had some process time. And the third thing, which we're really not going to have time to do, is output. That's what the brain does, those three things. It receives input, it processes, and then there's output. I see that happening a lot in international schools, where the kids get to do all three things. You know, their products are the output part of it. So in any case, if you close your eyes, you'll get that added benefit of this very restorative alpha. So when you can no longer hear it, and it's fine to keep your eyes open too, if you think about it. When you can no longer hear it, just raise your hand. Here we go. Very good. In 1985, some Swedish scientists started using a PET scan, which was a new technology. It measures blood flow in the brain. By inference, the area of the brain that has lights up the most. Blood is the most active part of the brain. There's some problems with that, but in general, it's pretty accurate. And what they discovered was when a subject is in a high sensory mode, or receiving information like you are now, hopefully, the blood pulls up back in the sensory part of the brain, which is the back part of the brain. So we've got vision here, we've got hearing here, we've got association cortex here. I'm still intrigued by this notion of getting a tattoo of the brain. What do you think of that idea? Isn't that cool? And then I could, do this. The visual cortex, the occipital lobes. Anyway, so back here, the blood pools up in the brain. But if you give a subject an opportunity to close their eyes and get quiet, 25 to 30% of the blood goes up to the frontal lobes. Now it's the frontal lobes which is so important. The right side of the brain is the part of the brain that's real active when we're encountering something new or novel. The right side gets very, very active. It's like, what is this? What is this? Right? The left side of the brain is busy trying to categorize it. Let's get it in a proper category. Have we encountered anything similar before? Because for meaning to happen, the newness has to somehow get integrated, and that can take time. But what's often left out of the equation are the frontal lobes, and the job of the frontal lobe is to assign meaning to it. What does this mean to me personally? Well, if it doesn't mean anything, I'm not going to remember it. So in education, when we're introducing something new and then give children a chance to absorb it, so there's input and then process, and the output is designed to help the frontal lobes get engaged. Like, how can I apply that in my life? How can I apply that to this project I'm working on? And then learning becomes very exciting because it's brain syntonic. It matches how the brain learns. So when we give children an opportunity for quiet time, and quiet time can be prolonged, like working on an art project or quiet reading, and sometimes when children are in this quiet mode, they're daydreaming like crazy, which is actually a pretty productive activity if it's done properly. And children who daydream more are typically much more creative. Anyway, we'll do some quiet time. So here's the human brain all folded up. I had some fun with the kids going through this yesterday, of course. We're looking at the cortex. That's the outer surface of the brain, Greek word meaning bark, like of a tree. 75% of the brain, approximately 73, is surface area. Which is very interesting because the surface of the brain, which is organized in 6 cell layers, these are the specialized cells called neurons that do the job. If you get enough of them, it gives rise to thinking. And now there's all this ongoing debate among scientists of what constitutes thinking and at what level of organization of the brain can thinking take place. Right? It isn't just humans who think. For goodness sakes, birds are great problem solvers. Corvids, crows and magpies and jays have been shown to do many of the things that humans do. They plan, they have complex thinking, they're problem solvers, they're creative. It's really stretching the boundaries of what we think of as intelligence. Yeah.
I heard recently that birds like crows would be much better at communicating with an alien civilization.
Wow,
because
that's
they
so
think differently than we do. And I was connecting this to what you said about the mammals thinking through models, through copying and repetition rather than starting with a blank piece of paper.
Very interesting. Maybe you'll send me this article.
I have to find it first.
If you think of it. I say that because a lot of the clues that I get as to what's new out there, I get from teachers. It was a teacher who told me about the heart field, right? And I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about? And she sent me my first link to this 20 years ago, when the first research was being done. So I always say that with great sincerity because, we're educators. We give each other the benefit of what we've learned and what we're interested in learning about. So, yeah. Yeah, so these are specialized cells. They communicate along these fibers and so forth. It's stacked up 6 cell layers high. Now there's something very, very fundamentally important to human development when we understand how this cortex matures developmentally. In order to best explain that to you, I need to violate a fundamental principle of presentation pedagogy. That's way too much information to take in. You're supposed to never, ever, ever do this. But I'm doing it. You have now a copy of this. It's posted on the website, so if you're interested. All right, so what am I up to here? Well, when I was working on the manuscript of a book back in the late 80s, I was really fascinated by this idea of brain stages and how they unfold in concert with what some of the major developmental theorists tell us about the sequela. We're reading it from bottom to top, and we're going through the stages at which the brain goes through major reorganizations. Across the top is that brain stage and the emergent property of an intelligence domain. Right? We know that children's intelligence develops in a certain sequence, whether it's math or language, even play develops in a very predictable sequela, which matches the maturational stages of the gray matter in the heart. And what I did was I just selected 5 more or less known developmentalists. If you read Ken Wilber's work, he used about 40 of them for his various writings, and his stuff still amazes me. So, if we look at the first stage, we're looking at the bottom back of the brain. We're looking at the, well, I'll show you the picture of it as we go along. So each stage unfolds. For example, at age 2, the brain is doubled in size, and it's thought that that's all, most of the growth and change is happening in the language centers of the brain in anticipation of this explosion of language that happens around the 2nd year of life. And then there's another big change that happens around age 6, which is the onset of early conceptualizing in human beings and so forth. And of course, all these were very well spelled out by Piaget. And then the frontal lobes come online. And then I think of this brain-heart connection, which is becoming a subject of intense interest. And so the brain stages obviously have something to do with the rise of intelligence. And it turns out the rise of intelligence changes brain. So there's always this dyadic interplay in nature where one thing influences the other, which influences the first, the second, and so forth. And so what we get are these emergent intelligences which play between the brain and mind, which you can't separate. All right, so then when we look across at what different developmentalists have said about each stage, somehow, without the benefit of brain science like Piaget, he was a biologist, but he didn't have this amazing understanding of the brain that we all have privy to. Somehow, just through observation, they intuited these things. Maria Montessori was brilliant at that, at having these great observational skills where she could talk about the different unfolding things happening in children. Amazing. But anyway, the term in the new biology and physics is emergence. The emergent properties of complex systems interacting with each other. And the brain is the most complex system for matter in the universe. All right, so this stage of the brain stem and the cerebellum, the 2 most ancient parts of the brain, the reptile brain in effect. We would understand it probably best through the lens of Piaget. Piaget called this sensory motor. So So, what emerges out of the sensory motor period, if things go reasonably well, if the children have been exposed to enough sensory input for all of their senses. How many senses? Well, who knows? Occupational therapists say 12. They assess and gauge the viability of a child through the 12 senses. Others go up to 40. You know, there's sense of temperature, sense of well-being, sense of the other, sense of meaning, sense of this, sense of that. And where do you draw the line? Well, maybe drawing the line isn't important. What's important is knowing that we have a lot of senses and that they're integrated with our ability to move. And this is common to all mammals. Movement is the key to learning. It's what opens up learning and intelligence. So what's the next emerging property has to do with the next level of brain architecture and evolution, which is the ancient mammal brain, paleo-mammalian brain. Piaget called this the pre-operational stage, but unless you really devote some time to understanding Piaget, it remains a little nebulous, but his description is beautiful. He called this the stage of the dreaming child, and he didn't have the benefit of the knowledge of brainwave, because the child at this stage is in the brainwave of dreaming. And it's very, very important that the default setting of the environment of the child allows for this dreaming to take place. Through imagination, through fantasy, through storytelling, and through play. So the more of that children are empowered to do, the better off they are, because it unlocks the high brain's potential by organizing the low brain's neural fields for the great unfolding which is yet to come for higher cognition. So then we go to concrete operations. Piaget was brilliant. The experiments he set up, I think, are unmatched by anybody since, for his understanding of how the child's conception of the world began to change here. It was really clever, very creative stuff. But in short, it's heart, hands, and mind, right? The more the children can get their hands on stuff, the more their heart can be engaged, so they're happy and curious and enthusiastic, the more their mind can absorb this. And again, if we had to locate it biologically, geographically, we would say it's the sensory, the association cortex back here. And the richer the interplay and organization of this through vast sensory experience, the more it's setting the stage for the operations that are going to take place in the frontal lobes on all that information. And that's the job of the frontal lobes, is to operate without benefit of any sensory input. There are no direct sensory outputs to the world up here. Everything we do up here, which distinguishes us as a human being, is predicated on what's come before it in terms of our experience of the world. And the more sensorially based that is, the richer the field that we can draw from when we're doing our formal operations in the frontal lobe. Now, in humans, the frontal lobe is huge. It's about a third of the volume of the brain. Just take your hand just like this one, so just like that. That's vast. And compare that to your neighbors, for example. Just put your hand on it. Well, I'm just kidding. You don't have to do it. Now, it wasn't... some of you may have been in the room when I talked to the high school kids about Phineas Gage and the dynamite tamping rod that went through his brain in 1848, and how he survived it and how his personality changed. Kids love that story. Yeah. You can drop a pin in the room. Everybody would hear it. Because it's such a fascinating story. And so I talked to them about Phineas Gage and the loss of his frontal lobes through a railroad accident before I introduced them to this. But it wasn't until the kind of technologies that we now have available to us that we have more direct evidence. From previous times, everything about the frontal lobes was inferential. And we didn't really get to the program until the 1960s. Up until the 1950s, there were frontal lobotomies still being performed in mental hospitals. mostly on hysterical women, right? So relatively recently, we've come to a much better understanding of what the frontal lobes are up to. Now, this is just a partial, but I think important sort of drop-down menu of the many things that the frontal lobe is responsible for. Each one you could probably write volumes about. But notably, these are things that develop very slowly. In children, they're largely missing. They show up a bit, and so schools have wisely, in many ways, implemented these programs of executive function to young children. We just don't want to push it too hard, but it's not a bad idea to introduce this to them, as long as it's playful and fun and sort of gentle in its approach. It sort of warms up the frontal lobes, right? We don't want to push children too hard out of their developmental stage, do we? We now know, and you would know this, that the frontal lobes don't really mature until maybe 25. The consensus seems to be pushing it a little bit further out towards maybe 30. I think for men in general, it's probably 45. Or am I being too autobiographical? But we have a lot of more direct evidence to support these well, somewhat conjectural things, not as conjectural as one thing. But this, for example, is a study that's been ongoing at the National Institutes of Mental Health in the U.S. And what we're looking at here is the ongoing longitudinal MRI studies of children. What you're seeing here is from age 5 to age 20. And MRIs do a pretty good job of, it goes through gray matter in a way that allows it to detect high and low levels of gray matter, thickness levels. So for example, in the 5-year-old where we see a lot of the warmer colors, the gray matter is thicker. But by age 20, it's pretty much thinned down. Now, what seems to be part of nature's plan is for there to be an explosion of connections in the brain for the first 2 years of life. So these 100 billion brain cells we have connecting with, on average, 10,000 other ones. By age 2, the average child has 1,000 trillion connections, most of which will be lost during the teen years. It'll be pruned away at the rate of about 1 billion connections a day. Over a decade, the average teenager is going to lose 10% of their gray matter or more. And that's absolutely nature's plan, because it should be offset by the aggregation and accumulation of white matter, which when I have the time with the kids, the high school kids, I definitely talk about that, because it has to do with drug use during the teen years. Binge drinking and pot smoking in particular will have a very untoward effect on these different processes, which are explosive during the teen years. Yeah.
I had never heard this term, white matter.
Oh yeah, the brain has gray matter and it has white matter. White matter is the myelin sheath. Yeah. And it acts as an insulating material. If my hand was a neuron, I do this activity with the kids, we have a lot of fun. If my hand was a neuron, the body of the cell are dendrites, which bring electrical information in from thousands of other cells. It's got one typically thick axon, which carries a higher load of electrical current and then goes out to thousands of other cells. This needs insulating material, and that's myelin. It wraps around it when we're learning.
So this is the gray matter.
This is the gray matter,
and
absolutely.
This is the white matter.
Yep.
So like
No, the white matter is only here. It's only around.
Oh, it's not around. It's
no,
not
no,
around the whole thing. It's just
no.
around
It's only around the axon.
Okay. Okay.
I left out all that for you because I just have so much other stuff.
No, that's okay. I just never heard that term before. White
Yeah,
matter.
no, that's good. So what you're actually seeing here is the decline of gray matter. What you don't see is the increase in white matter here. So that's implicit in the imaging that you're looking at. white matter accumulates. 98% of the white matter appears after birth. About 2% of the brain is myelinated so that a baby can do certain reflexive actions like suck, startle, turn over a bit, right? So it's 100% genetics. But after that, there's a shift. The balance between genetics and environment starts to shift. And the higher up you go in the brain with these operations, the less dependent it is on genes. Of course, everything has its genetic component. And the more it's dependent on what's available in the modeled environment to turn those areas of the brain on. So we have modeling, followed by practice and repetition, followed by application or generalization. That's the simplest model of learning for mammals. The model appears, a new thing is introduced, there's opportunities to practice it in various ways and receive feedback in various ways, and then comes generalization. And that's the philosophy of education, really. Why we have teacher training is to improve our modeling. Why we have all these different activities we're doing with kids is application, is practice, repetition, variation, to keep kids interested. And then the great philosophical hope of education is that kids will be able to apply this for the rest of their life, right? They'll be better citizens, they'll be more successful in all their endeavors, and so forth and so on. It's amazing. Watch. You see that? You see how it changed colors? This is really brilliant. It's a flash animation. Usually I can't get it to happen more than once. But now you're looking at the 20-year-old brain. This is 15 years of gray matter pruning and thinning in about 4 seconds. Let me see it. We'll do it again. Go. I don't think it's going to do it. This is a new program, and either it's got a glitch in it. Yeah, see, that's interesting because it doesn't show up there. All right. Good. All right, so you got to see it again, right? Now, what's interesting is the peak of gray matter in females ends at the onset of puberty, roughly around age 11 and a half. They'll never have more gray matter in their entire life than they have at 11 and a half. Males a little bit slower, about age 13, right? And then, by then, it's starting to thin out, and they'll lose 1% of the gray matter per year. So when I talk to the kids, I talk to them how important it is that they really get into whatever they're into. Sports, music, academics, it all works together to improve brain function for life. And there's 7 areas of the teen brain, I'll talk about a little bit later, that are undergoing major reconstruction during the teen years. It's one of the most revolutionary findings in brain science just in the last 10 years. We have a whole new appreciation of what teens are up to. Some neuroscientists going as so far as to say there's never a time in life when the human being can learn more than during adolescence. It's really amazing. So this is the stage where the frontal lobes, these are the teen years, where Piaget accurately pointed out that it's a stage of formal operations, which means it's the advent of hypothesizing, coming up with deductive ways and inductive ways of thinking, theorizing, and so forth. Knowing that this all operates on the previous fields of knowledge. It operates independently of any sensory input. And then comes what Piaget, more recent followers of Piaget have suggested as a, quote, post-formal operation period, which has to do with what some of the other folks are talking about here. It has to do with morality, ethics, compassion, wisdom, things of that nature, which in our world today are going to become increasingly important to think about as we send these children out into a world that's going to be massively complicated with very, very complex problems. mostly driven by climate change. Whether as half the people in the US say it doesn't exist or not, it is a huge challenge which our children need to be up to the task of it. Fully equipped with body, mind, heart, and soul and game in order to continue to live successful, happy lives. And I worry about that because I have 4 grandchildren who are going to live through all that. So, what's important from the perspective, I think, of education is to realize and appreciate that if we want to get our kids here, and we do, we start there. We really think and plan and implement our strategies around that first stage. I think grounding a curriculum in sensory motor aspects of human development needs to go along through the whole curriculum. There are some schools which I've visited and spoken to, where movement is the primary curricular activity. They have martial arts, they have dance, they have brain gym, they have all these things which they are doing with children, which are known to improve learning, and in many ways help children overcome some of their learning deficits. Done here. This is what I want to show you. As evidenced by the way in which the brain, the cortex, 6 cell layers thick, 75% of the brain, the way it matures is from bottom, which is sensory motor, to top, which is cognitive, in all mammals. So, Piaget speaks of sensory motor. He's talking about the bottommost layer of the cortex maturing properly. So the brain is known to develop and mature from bottom to top, inside to outside, side to side, and back to front. And if we do that reasonably well, and that's all we have to do is do it reasonably well. We don't have to get it perfect. If the brain unfolds as it's meant to in this spiral, bottom to top, inside to outside, side to side, then it's following the true sort of evolutionary trajectory, which seems like nature has in mind for a human species, is to activate these frontal lobes in the best possible way, along with the heart, so that we have wise and compassionate human beings who treat each other with respect and kindness and work together to come up with innovative solutions and all the things that are at work here in the school. And all the international schools I visited, public schools struggle with this a lot because in the US, they just aren't appreciated any longer. We're just, seems like we're just invested in throwing kids away. It's very sad.